Hi, my name is Jackie Jacobs. Today I will be sharing about honeybees and how they contribute to our lives personally and globally. One of the quickest ways to clear a room is to yell the word bee. All that is seen from the public eye is the stinger. But fun fact about bees, they have more body parts than just their stinger, which is oh so terrifying. They also do more things than just make honey. For me personally, I used to hate all types of flying insects. Bees, wasps, hornets, you name it, didn't like 'em. But all that changed for me one fall morning when I stepped on what I thought was a log, but ended up getting stung all over my neck. I'm incredible to talk about this topic because I was part of a group called Wild Whatcom, where we studied a lot about nature, and I was part of this group for about 5 years. I also have spent years researching and have been fascinated by honeybees for such a long time. I'm also educated on the significance bees bring to the world. First, I will talk about the life of the honeybee and how it develops. Secondly, I will talk about the ways one can distinguish a honeybee from different types of insects. Lastly, I will talk about why bees are so important. First, I will talk about the life cycle of the honeybee. According to blogs.evergreen.edu, there are three main stages in the honeybee developmental process, that being the egg stage, the larval stage, and the pupal stage. Like most insects, honeybees start their life in an egg. The queen bee lays fertilized and unfertilized eggs. Fertilized eggs hatch worker bees and queen bees. Unfertilized eggs hatch drone bees. Normally, eggs take about 3 days or so to hatch, but timing is a variable depending on the hive, the species, the type, and the location of the bees. After the egg hatches, it spends the next 6 or so days in the larval stage. During this stage, the larva eats something called worker jelly, which consists of fluid made from adult bees' hypophagogen gel and mandibular gels. This is something that adults gather around while they are pollinating, and they keep it on the side of their leg, and then when they get back to the hive, they put it down in a pile, and then this is where the larva gets their protein and their nutrients. The larvae eat this worker jelly between 150 and 800 times each day. This helps them build fat that they can use later in the developmental process. After about 8 or 9 days, broad cells begin to develop, and the larva begins to molt. After molting, similar to a caterpillar or the butterfly, it begins to make a cocoon using its salivary glands. This gives it a protective shell to do more of its process in growing. After the larva is finished with its cocoon process, it moves on to the pupal stage of its development. This stage is where the main body parts begin to develop, such as the wings, the organs, the eyes, legs, arms, you name it, abdomen. The pupa uses its previously stored lipids and glycogen nutrients as protein to continue its growing. Then, within 20 to 21 days, the pupa begins to chew through its cocoon. At this point, the bee is very fragile. Its outer layer, or called the cuticle, which is its skin at the time, is paper thin. While in this stage, the insect is referred to as a callow bee, and it is not quite ready to leave the hive. Instead, it stays in the hive, it starts processes of making honeycomb, it cleans honeycomb, and it also acts as like a mother or a parental figure to the young larva in the hive. Once the glands of the bee have fully formed, the bee begins its lifelong journey collecting nectar outside of the hive. Let's get more specific about the types of bees. That way, we can start yelling wasp, drone, worker bee, queen bee, instead of just, a bee. Honeybees go through multiple stages before becoming adults. Now that we know more about the developmental process, let's get into the different types of bees and how and what they result in after they've grown. I will now explain some of the main different types of bees. According to askabiologist.asu.edu, there are the drone bees, which are the males, the worker bees, which are the females, and the queen bees, which are also females. Fun fact, the worker bees are actually the bees that go outside and pollinate flowers and collect nutrients. The drone bees are the male bees, and they stay in the hive, and their main job is to mate with the queen, and that's also how they get the fertilized eggs. One main way to spot the difference between bees is their size. On average, a worker bee is about 1.5 centimeters, a drone about 1.8, and then a queen bee is a whopping 2.3 centimeters. The stingers on bees aren't actually used for stinging. They're actually also used to lay eggs, which makes the worker and queen bees the only honeybees with stingers. So if you get stung, just don't hit a woman, all right? Depending if a bee has a stinger or not can help identify what kind of bee it is. Spotting the difference between honeybees, wasps, and hornets can also be determined by their bodies. Honeybees are typically thicker throughout the body, whereas wasps are thinner between the abdomen and the thorax. Wasps actually have more defined stripes, so it's more yellow-black or black and yellow, whereas honeybees, they're a little fuzzier and a little bit thicker, so it can be hard to tell what their stripes look like or if they have any stripes at all. Hornets also are similar to wasps, where they're a little bit thinner, but they're mostly darker in color. So like whether that being a darker yellow or like a kind of a brownish burnt yellow or just even black sometimes. Another way to tell the difference between bees is by their proboscis, which is basically their mouth. Bees have a proboscis, which is a long tongue-like part of their body, where they go into a flower or they use it to pollinate. And so honeybees have a longer proboscis, but wasps and hornets do not because they don't use it for pollinating. They use it just mostly for eating, and so they have a shorter one. Now that we know more about the different types of bees, let's go on to talk about how bees impacted us. It can be hard to tell what kind of bee you see with just a quick glance. I, for one, did not know what kind of bees are stinging me. Now that we learned about the developmental stages of a honeybee, let's talk about the benefits that the world gets from these bees. Honeybees, or as we now know, worker bees, are responsible for going outside the hive. It is now their job to pollinate plants. Then they return to the hive to begin the honey-making process. Honeybees are important because they are the main pollinating insects on the planet. According to sustainedweb.org, 80% of crops in commercial farms are pollinated by bees. Honeybees pollinate fruits, vegetables, trees, almonds. I know, almonds is kind of crazy, and all kinds of plants. Without them, we would have no produce in the world today. As a matter of fact, if there weren't any bees, we would not have the same world that we would be living in today. Grass would not be green, flowers would not blossom, pretty much everything would be dead. Unfortunately, the world has not impacted bees as much as they have for us. Climate change has caused irregular blooming patterns for flowers, and according to PT Home and Garden, the issues revolving climate change leave bees without food sources, which also leads to their colonies or their hives dying. Bees are also being negatively affected by the pesticides used by farmers in some crops. These pesticides are extremely poisonous and can end up killing bees instantly or over time. But thankfully, there are some organizations that are working to plant some bee-friendly gardens and help raise the populations once more. Today, I talked about the life cycle of a honeybee. I also explained how to identify a honeybee amongst other insects. And lastly, I talked about why honeybees are so important to the world. On that fall morning, breathing in the cold air, what felt like hundreds of wasps surrounding me, taking turns stinging my neck, changed something for me. I went home that day and started to do research on what kind of insects had stung me, and I found out that actually I had stepped on a mud wasp's nest. And funny thing with mud wasps is that they make their nests in the ground, whereas honeybees and other bees typically use a tree or sometimes unfortunately your house. So that's why I didn't see it when I stepped on it. And I also found out that they weren't stinging me, they were biting me. And that's one of their uses of defense is they bite instead of sting. And this may sound like a horrible experience, but this incident grew my fascination and started my research because I was so curious about what had happened to me that day. Thank you.